They said I started the fire, but that night I was the one pulling kids out of the flames. When I heard the first explosion, I wasn't even inside my house. I was across the street, trying to call 911. By the time the firefighters arrived, smoke had already covered the whole block, and someone pointed at me, yelling that it was all my fault. I didn't even understand what was happening until they handcuffed me right there in front of the burning homes. The night had been colder than usual for late October. I'd spent the evening repairing an old space heater in my basement, one I'd salvaged from a junk sale months earlier. My house was small, a one-story rental at the corner of Willow Street, with peeling paint and a crooked porch light that flickered every time the wind blew. I didn't own much, just a few tools, a radio, and some second-hand furniture that came with the place, but I liked the quiet. After years working double shifts at the mill, quiet was something I'd learned to value. The neighborhood was made up of families mostly, people who worked in town, lived paycheck to paycheck, and didn't talk much beyond a polite wave when you passed their yard. I wasn't exactly close to anyone. I kept to myself, fixed things, and helped when asked. Some of the kids would come by sometimes, asking if I could patch their bikes or inflate their basketballs. I always said yes. Maybe that's why when the fire broke out, I didn't think. I just ran. It started around 10:40 p.m. I remember the exact time because I just looked at my phone to check a voicemail from work. There was a sudden bang, not loud enough to sound like an explosion, but deep, like something heavy collapsing. I ran outside thinking maybe one of the old power lines had fallen again. But when I turned toward the street, I saw orange lights spilling out from under the shutters of the Martins' house. For a second, I froze. Then I dropped my phone and sprinted across the yard. The air already smelled like burning plastic. I could hear someone shouting from inside, maybe two voices, maybe more. The front door was blocked. I tried the handle, but it was too hot, so I went around the side, to the small window near the kitchen. The glass cracked when I hit it with a wrench I'd grabbed from my belt. Flames were crawling up the curtains, licking the ceiling. I yelled but couldn't hear any answer. Then I saw them, two small figures huddled near the back doorway. The Martins' kids. I didn't think, Una. I just climbed in. By the time I got them out, the front of the house was almost completely engulfed. I left them on the lawn with the neighbors and went back, trying to see if anyone else was trapped inside. That's when someone shouted my name. Man. I turned and saw an older man from two houses down pointing at me, screaming that it was my fault. I didn't even understand what he meant until he said, "It started in your basement." I looked back at my own house. That's when I saw it. The smoke was coming from my place too. Darker, heavier, heavier. My heart dropped. I ran toward it, but the heat pushed me back. I could hear the sirens in the distance. When the firefighters arrived, they didn't ask questions. They saw me covered in soot, standing near the source of the fire, and did what they had to. Someone must have told them I lived there. Someone must have said something about the heater I'd been fixing. It didn't matter that I'd just pulled two children out of a burning house. The moment they saw the blackened basement windows, the story was already written for them. I remember the cold of the cuffs more than the heat of the fire. I remember how everyone stared, the mothers clutching their kids, the fathers whispering to each other. No one asked if I was okay. No one looked at the kids I'd saved. They just looked at me, the man who lived alone, the one who tinkered with wires and tools. Perfect suspect. They kept me in the back of the squad car while the firemen worked. From the window, I could see the flames eating through the roof. I thought about my tools, the photographs I'd kept of my parents, the letters from my sister who lived in Illinois. All of it was gone within minutes. But what hurt most wasn't losing things. It was hearing my name whispered through the crowd, like it meant danger. At the station, they took my statement. I told them everything. The sound I heard, the kids I rescued, the heater I'd been fixing. I told them I'd unplugged it hours before the fire. The officer writing it down didn't even look at me. He just nodded occasionally and kept typing. When he was done, he said I'd need to stay overnight until they sorted things out. I spent the night in a holding cell. The walls smelled of bleach and old metal. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the flames again and the faces of those kids. I wondered if they were okay. I wondered if anyone had told them the truth. By morning, the story was already in the news. A local man suspected in Willow Street fire. My full name, My job, even a photo of me from my work ID, all online. The reporter said the fire had likely originated in the suspect's basement. They didn't say anything about the rescues. They didn't say anything about the fact that I'd called for help, for help, for help. Just that I was under investigation. When they released me that afternoon, I had nowhere to go. The house was gone. Just a blackened shell surrounded by yellow tape. The air still smelled like wet ashes. My tools had melted together in twisted shape. I found my mailbox half buried under debris, with letters inside charred but still readable at the edges. One of them was from my sister. I couldn't bring myself to open it.
Yeah, offered prosecutors offered me a cut at the shelter near the high school.
I thanked them and went. That night, I lay there listening to the sound of other people breathing, families who'd also lost their homes, people crying quietly. I didn't cry. I just stared at the ceiling and tried to piece together how everything had turned so fast. The next day, the investigator came by. His name was Carson. He said he needed to go over a few details about the wiring in my basement. I told him again about the heater, about the extension cords, about how I'd unplugged everything before leaving. He nodded, polite but distant. When I asked if they'd found a cause, he said they were still analyzing the samples. Then he left. For weeks I lived in that shelter, surrounded by people who looked at me with the same quiet suspicion. The news stopped mentioning me, but the whispers didn't. Every time someone new arrived, they'd ask who I was, and someone else would tell them. That's the guy they think started it. I stopped talking after a while. I helped clean the cafeteria, repaired a few broken chairs, kept my head down. Nights were the worst. That smell, a mix of burnt plastic and rain-soaked ash, never really left my nose. It stayed with me even when the wind changed. The official report came 3 weeks later, printed on plain paper and stapled in the corner. It said the fire had started in my basement near the electrical outlet where the heater had been plugged in. The conclusion read, "Likely cause, electrical malfunction and improper equipment maintenance." That line destroyed what little reputation I had left. No one mentioned that I had disconnected the heater hours before the fire. No one mentioned that the wiring in those rentals was decades old, patched together by landlords who didn't care as long as the rent came on time. It was simpler to blame one man than to admit an entire row of homes was a fire hazard. When I took the report to my landlord, he didn't even open the door. He shouted through the screen that his insurance company had already called, and that if I tried to contact him again, he'd call the police. I left the papers on his porch and walked away. That was the moment I realized there would be no fixing this, not through logic, not through proof, not through anything that resembled fairness. The shelter was temporary, so I moved into a cheap motel near the highway. It smelled like cigarettes and old carpets. The owner gave me a weekly rate because I told him I was between jobs. He didn't ask questions and I didn't offer answers. Every night I'd sit outside on the concrete steps, listening to the trucks pass by. Sometimes when the traffic was light, I could almost hear the sound of crickets. It reminded me of the nights before everything burned, when I'd fall asleep with the window open and the sound of life outside felt like a small comfort. I tried to find work again, but the town was small and news traveled fast. At the hardware store, the manager recognized me immediately. He smiled politely and said they'd already filled the position. At the auto shop, the owner pretended to check my resume, then said he'd call me later. He never did. It's strange how quickly people rewrite who you are. Before the fire, I was the quiet guy who fixed things and helped out when someone needed an extra hand. After, I became the man who set his own street on fire. Same face, same name, different meaning. I spent most of my days walking around town, just to stay out of my room. Sometimes I'd pass the ruins of Willow Street. They'd cleared most of the debris by then, but the black marks still stained the sidewalks. The Martins' house was gone completely, replaced by a flat field of dirt. I saw the kids once, a boy and a girl maybe 8 and 10, walking with their mother toward a car. I thought about going up to them, about saying something. But what would I even say? I'm the man who saved you, but everyone thinks I burned your home down. So I just watched them drive away. About a month after the fire, I got a letter from a lawyer. He represented the insurance company. They were suing me for damages, over $100,000. I laughed when I opened it, not because it was funny, but because there was nothing else left to do. I didn't even own a car anymore. The fire had taken that too. Still, the idea that I owed money for something I didn't do was absurdly fitting. When I met with the public defender assigned to me, she looked exhausted. Her name was Ellen, mid-40s, kind-eyed. She said cases like mine rarely made it to court. "Oh, they'll probably settle," she said. "It's just about liability." I nodded, but I could tell she didn't really believe I was innocent. Maybe she didn't even think it mattered. The hearing was short. I stood in front of a judge who never once looked directly at me. The insurance representative read his statement, citing the fire report. Ellen spoke briefly, mentioning the uncertainty of the electrical inspection. The judge nodded a few times, then scheduled another date for the settlement review. Or here, it felt more like paperwork than justice. After that, I stopped checking the mail. I stopped watching the news. I lived quietly, doing odd jobs for cash, cleaning gutters, painting fences, hauling trash for old neighbors who pretended not to recognize me. Some nights, I'd lie awake and replay that moment in front of my burning house, when the man pointed at me and yelled. It's strange how one sentence can echo for so long in your head. I started writing things down in a notebook, not because I thought anyone would read it, but because I needed to remember. When you lose everything, your memories become the only thing left that feels solid. I wrote about the smell of the smoke, the way the flames moved across the ceiling, the look on the kids' faces when I carried them out. I wrote about the silence after the sirens stopped. It helped a little. One afternoon, I went back to what used to be my house. The lot was fenced off, but no one was there. I climbed over and walked through the ashes. The ground was uneven, soft in place. I found a piece of metal, the handle of my wrench, blackened but still recognizable. I kept it. It was proof that I'd existed there, that I'd done something real. While I stood there, a car pulled up. It was a small sedan the kind families drive. A woman got out. I recognized her instantly. Mrs. Martin, the mother of the children I'd rescued. She looked thinner, tired. She froze when she saw me. For a moment, I thought she might yell or tell me to leave. But she didn't. She just looked at me with this mix of fear and confusion, like she wasn't sure what I was supposed to be. A villain or a savior. "I didn't do it," I said quietly. It was the first thing I'd said out loud in days. She nodded slowly, eyes glossy but unreadable. "I know," she said. Her voice cracked a little. "The investigators told me last week. It wasn't from your house. It started from the back porch. Faulty dryer wiring." I didn't know what to say. The words hung in the air like something fragile. "They cleared you," she added. "They just haven't made it public yet." I looked down at the dirt under my shoes, at the blackened ground where my life used to stand. I should have felt relief, but all I felt was emptiness. Weeks of silence, humiliation, and isolation don't disappear with one correction. People forget rumors only after they've destroyed enough. She thanked me then for saving her children. I nodded, unable to speak. When she left, I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty lot. The wind picked up, scattering small ashes across the ground, and I realized something. Even when the truth finally arrives, it doesn't fix the damage left behind. That night, I walked back to the motel and packed my things. There wasn't much. A few clothes, my notebook, the burned wrench. I didn't leave a note. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Sometimes the only way to survive a place that's branded you is to leave it behind completely. I caught a bus heading south. Through the window, I watched the lights of my town fade into the distance. Willow Street was gone now. Not just the houses, but everything that had tied me there. The world outside was dark, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I owed it an explanation. The bus took me as far as Madison. I didn't have a plan. I just wanted distance, something to quiet the noise that had been following me since the fire. When the driver announced the last stop, I stepped out into the cold air and watched the taillights fade down the road. For a while, I stood there with my bag slung over my shoulder, feeling like a ghost among strangers. Madison wasn't a big city compared to the ones I'd seen on TV, but it felt alive in a way my old town never had. There were people walking dogs, cars honking, lights flickering in diners and bars. Everyone was moving somewhere. No one cared who I was. That anonymity felt like mercy. I found a room in a boarding house not far from the river. It was small, one bed, one window, a shared bathroom down the hall, but it was clean. The owner, an older woman named Ruth, gave me a key and didn't ask for references. She just said, "Rent's due Friday," and handed me a towel. That was enough. I started looking for work the next morning. I walked up and down Main Street, reading signs taped to windows. Most said help wanted, but when I asked, they all needed paperwork I didn't have. References, proof of residence, background checks. I didn't blame them. I wouldn't have hired me either, not if I'd read the same news articles they could find online. On the third day, I got lucky. A man at a small repair shop said he needed someone to help clean and move equipment. Cash only. I nodded and started that afternoon. It wasn't much. Sweeping floors, hauling scrap, organizing tools, but it was work. At the end of the week, he paid me $50 and a sandwich. I thanked him like it was gold. I didn't talk much with anyone. People in places like that don't ask questions if you work hard and keep your head down. That was fine by me. I was tired of explaining who I was and what had happened. Every time I tried to talk about it, the words felt heavier, like they belonged to someone else's story. Nights were quieter now. I'd sit by the window and watch the lights across the street flicker in the water. Sometimes I thought about Willow Street, the smell of wet ash, the kids I'd saved, the way Mrs. Martin had said, "I know." It should have been closure, but it didn't feel that way. The truth had come too late. Once people decide what you are, it takes years for them to forget it if they ever do. One evening, while cleaning out a broken washing machine at the shop, I found a small piece of metal that reminded me of the wrench I'd kept from the fire. It was twisted, half-rusted, useless, but I took it anyway and kept it in my pocket. It wasn't about the object. It was about the reminder that even broken things could still have weight. A few weeks later, Ruth asked if I could help her fix a broken railing on the stairs. I agreed, and after that she started calling me for little repairs. A leaking pipe, a loose hinge, a door that wouldn't close properly. She never said much, just thanked me with a quiet nod or a cup of coffee. But after a while, she started leaving extra meals outside my door. Too much food, she'd say, pretending it wasn't deliberate. I didn't argue. One night, she knocked on my door and asked if I could take a look at the boiler downstairs. I followed her to the basement. It smelled like oil and damp concrete, just like my old house. For a second, I froze. The memory hit me so sharply that I had to grip the railing to stay steady. Ruth noticed. She asked if I was okay. I told her I just needed a moment. While I worked on the boiler, I thought about that night again. The noise, the heat, the accusation. It was strange how memory works. Even when the truth changes, the pain doesn't. I finished the job, wiped my hands, and stood there in the dim light for a long time, listening to the steady hum of the machine. It felt almost peaceful. Mechanical things make sense. They fail for reasons you can see and fix. People don't. After that, Ruth started introducing me to a few of her friends who needed help with odd repairs. I fixed fences, patched roofs, replaced outlets. Most of them paid in cash, and that was enough to get by. Slowly, I began to rebuild something like a life. Not the same as before, but quieter, simpler. I didn't tell anyone about Willow Street. It wasn't a secret exactly, but it wasn't something I wanted to live through again in words. Sometimes on Sundays, I'd walk along the river. The sound of water helped me think. I'd watch families feed ducks, children running with breadcrumbs in their hands. It always brought back the image of those two kids I'd carried out of the fire. I never saw them again after that day with their mother. But I hoped they were somewhere safe, living lives that wouldn't always circle back to that night. I didn't know if Mrs. Martin ever told them who had saved them. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe they didn't even remember my face anymore. That thought hurt at first, but after a while I realized forgetting might be a kind of mercy too. Not every memory needs to survive. Around Christmas, Ruth asked if I had any plans. I said no. She invited me to have dinner with her and a few tenants. We sat in the kitchen with old dishes and mismatched chairs, the smell of roast chicken filling the air. It had been years since I'd sat at a table like that. I didn't say much, but when they laughed, I smiled. That night, when everyone had gone to bed, I stood outside under the falling snow. It was quiet, a kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty but full. The flakes landed on my jacket and melted into tiny dark spots. I thought about everything that had burned, everything that had been taken, and everything that was still here. Somehow that balance felt fair. Over the next months, the rhythm of life settled into something steady. Work, food, quiet evenings. I fixed things earned enough to stay warm and learned to live without the need for explanations. People saw me as reliable, and that was enough. I didn't need them to know the rest. Still, there were nights when the fire came back in dreams. The heat on my skin, the sound of wood splitting, the faces of strangers watching from behind the caution tape. I'd wake up sweating, the smell of smoke still clinging to memory. I'd get up, wash my face, sit by the window until the dark began to fade. Then I'd start another day. Maybe that's what recovery really is. Not forgetting, not erasing, but learning to live alongside what you can't undo. I didn't have much, but I had my hands, my work, and the quiet acceptance that comes when you stop asking why me and start asking what now. By the end of that first year, I'd saved enough to rent a small garage on the edge of town. I started collecting old tools, repairing broken machines people threw away. Some days, kids from the neighborhood would come by, just like they used to back home, asking to watch or help. I let them. They reminded me of something simple, the part of myself that still wanted to be useful. And maybe that was enough. The garage became my world. It wasn't much, just a concrete box with 2 cracked windows and a tin roof that rattled when it rained. But it gave me something the shelter and motel never could, a door I could lock and call my own. The walls were bare except for a few hooks where I hung my tools, and the floor was scattered with old appliances people had left behind. Radios, fans, vacuum cleaners, pieces of other people's lives that they didn't want anymore. I liked fixing them. Oh, it made sense to me, the way broken things could be taken apart and put back together if you were patient enough. Ruth helped me find the place. She said a friend of hers used to store gardening equipment there but hadn't used it for years. I paid cash each month, no questions asked. I think she knew I needed space. Every time she passed by, she'd leave something small on the step. A jar of soup, a roll of wire, sometimes just a note that said keep going. Work started coming on its own. A neighbor told another, and before long people were dropping by asking if I could fix things. Lawnmowers, lamps, radios. Most of them paid me in cash or food. Sometimes they'd stay to talk, asking how I'd learned to do all this. I'd tell them I'd worked maintenance before, which was true. I never told them about Willow Street. That part of my life stayed sealed inside me, like smoke trapped in a jar. I started keeping a small ledger, not for money, but for order. I'd list what came in, what was fixed, what couldn't be saved. Writing things down gave structure to the days. It helped me see that something was moving forward, even if I wasn't. Some nights, after the last job was done, I'd sit outside the garage on a broken chair and listen to the city breathing. The sound of cars in the distance, the occasional train whistle, the hum of the streetlights. It all felt steady, like the world was still willing to move, even if I'd stopped trying to chase it. One afternoon, a man brought in an old cassette player, the kind with real buttons and a handle on top. He said it had belonged to his father and hadn't worked in years. I told him I'd try. When I opened it up, I found a piece of melted tape still caught inside. It smelled faintly of smoke and dust. I worked on it all day, soldering tiny wires, cleaning the rust, winding the tape carefully until it was smooth again. When I finished, I pressed play. The speaker crackled, and a soft voice came through. Old music, something slow and grainy. I sat there for a long time listening. It wasn't about the song, it was the sound of something surviving after being forgotten. That night, I wrote in my notebook again. I hadn't written much since leaving Willow Street. Most of my thoughts had turned into actions, fixing, working, surviving. But hearing that music made me want to remember things differently. Not just as loss, but as continuation. The notebook had burn marks on the cover from the night I pulled it out of the ashes. It felt right to write in it again. I wrote about the fire, about the people who had turned away, about Mrs. Martin's quiet words when she told me I was cleared. And then I wrote something I hadn't been able to admit until then, that maybe forgiveness doesn't need to come from others. Maybe it starts when you stop arguing with what happened. Winter that year was long and sharp. The snow covered the street outside the garage in heavy drifts, and my breath hung in the air when I worked. Some days were so cold that metal tools stuck to my gloves, but I stayed busy. The quiet made space for thought. On New Year's Eve, I stayed late at the garage. The city outside celebrated fireworks flashing over the rooftops, people shouting, laughing. I sat by the small heater I'd fixed myself and listened. I didn't feel bitter about being alone. There was something peaceful about it. No noise, no judgment, no reminders of who I'd been. Just the sound of small explosions in the distance and the warmth of the heater humming beside me. Around midnight, Ruth knocked on the door. She brought a thermos of soup and 2 paper cups. We sat on the steps, drinking quietly, watching the lights fade. She didn't ask questions about my past, and I didn't offer any. We talked about small things. The weather, the shop, the price of fuel. It was ordinary, but I realized I'd missed ordinary more than anything. After she left, I went back inside and wrote 1 sentence in my notebook. I'm still here. The next months passed without much change. I repaired things, earned enough to keep the lights on, and started to feel invisible again, but in a way that no longer hurt. There's a strange kind of freedom in being forgotten. People stopped asking about where I came from. They only cared that I did the job right and showed up when I said I would. One day, I received a letter at the garage. No return address. Inside was a photograph. The Martins' 2 children, standing in front of what looked like a new house. On the back, in small handwriting, were 2 words. Thank you. I sat with that picture for a long time. The image was simple. 2 kids smiling, sunlight behind them. But it hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't about gratitude. It was about proof that what I'd done mattered. That maybe everything I'd lost had given someone else a chance to keep living. I pinned the photo to the wall above my workbench. Not as a reminder of the fire, but as a promise that even if no one ever cleared my name publicly, even if no one ever apologized, something good had come out of it. Every so often, I'd catch myself staring at it while working. It helped on the hard days, the ones when the past felt close enough to touch, when I could still hear the sirens in my head. It reminded me that pain wasn't the whole story. There had been saving too. By spring, the garage had become something more than a workspace. People started calling it the fixer's place. Sometimes they'd drop off things that didn't even need repair, an old radio that still worked, a lamp they didn't have space for, as if giving them to me meant they'd keep their value somehow. I never turned anything away. Everything broken or unneeded still had a place here. Maybe that's what I'd become too. Something not new, not whole, but still working in my own quiet way. Spring didn't arrive all at once that year. It came slowly, like the city was learning how to breathe again. The air softened, the nights grew longer, and the garage began to smell like metal and dust instead of cold. I kept the doors open while I worked, letting the wind move through. One morning, while I was cleaning the tools, a boy stopped by. He couldn't have been more than 10, riding a bike that looked older than him. The chain was rusted, and one wheel bent inward. He asked if I could fix it. I told him to leave it and come back in a few days. Instead, he sat on a crate and watched me work. He didn't talk much, just asked small questions, how the gears worked, what each tool was for. I told him what I knew. He reminded me of myself at that age, always curious about how things fit together. Before he left, he said his name was Jacob. I didn't ask for more. Over the next few weeks, Jacob started coming back. Sometimes with something broken, sometimes with nothing but questions. I let him sweep the floor or hand me parts while I worked. I didn't think much of it at first, but soon his visits became routine. He'd drop by after school, leave before dark. The garage wasn't quiet anymore. I realized how much space silence had taken in my life. It had been comforting once, but now it felt too large. Watching him there, small, restless, alive, it made me remember how long I'd been living like a shadow. One afternoon, he asked about the photo on the wall, the one of the 2 children. He said they looked happy. I just nodded. Then he asked if they were mine. I told him no, that I'd just helped them once. He didn't press further. Kids seem to understand when not to. After he left, I thought about the question more than I wanted to. The truth was, I'd never had children. I'd spent most of my life working long hours, telling myself there'd be time later. But time doesn't wait for permission. It keeps going whether you move with it or not. Shit. That night, I took a walk through the neighborhood. The air smelled of rain and soil. The city lights shimmered on puddles in the street. I passed a small park where families were still out. Kids running barefoot, parents sitting on benches talking quietly. I stood there for a moment, watching, then turned away. There was a peace in accepting the distance between myself and the rest of the world. Not bitterness, just understanding that my path had split from theirs a long time ago. But for the first time in years, I wondered if it had to stay that way. A few days later, Jacob brought his mother to the garage. She introduced herself, thanked me for keeping an eye on him. She looked tired but kind. I told her he was no trouble, that he helped more than he realized. She smiled and said he didn't talk to many people. I understood what she meant. Some kids carry silence the same way adults do. After that, she started dropping off small things for me. Sandwiches, fruit, sometimes just a thermos of coffee. It wasn't much, but it made the days softer. By summer, the garage felt alive again. I painted the door a dull blue, fixed the roof, and started keeping a radio on the shelf. The music filled the space between the clinking of tools and the hum of machines. It wasn't loud, just enough to remind me that the world kept moving. One morning, I opened the newspaper and saw an article about the fire on Willow Street. 3 years had passed. The city was rebuilding that area, turning the old houses into new housing complexes. The article mentioned that investigators had never found the real cause. My name wasn't there, not even once. For a long time, that would have angered me. But now, I just folded the paper and put it away. Maybe silence was its own kind of closure. Maybe not every truth needed to be written for it to exist. Still, that day I worked slower. My hands trembled a little, and I dropped a few screws. The memories felt heavier than usual. The smoke, the shouting, the way everyone looked at me like I'd set the world on fire. When the feeling got too strong, I stepped outside. The sun was bright, almost blinding. Across the street, Jacob was sitting on the curb eating an apple. He waved when he saw me. I waved back. And somehow that small gesture pulled me out of the past for a moment. That night, I wrote again in my notebook. You can't rebuild what was lost, but you can repair what's left. I slept well for the first time in weeks. The next few months passed quietly. I started getting more work than I could handle, so I taught Jacob how to fix small things. Radios, lamps, fans. He picked it up fast. His mother said he'd started talking more at school. I told her that wasn't because of me, but I was glad to hear it. Sometimes people came by and asked how I learned to fix things so well. I tell them it came from learning how to live with mistakes. They usually laughed, thinking it was a joke, but I meant it. One evening, a man stopped by with an old generator. He said he used to live on Willow Street before the fire. My chest tightened when he said it. I asked if he lost anyone. He said no, just everything he owned. Then he added quietly that he remembered people saying they'd caught the wrong guy. I didn't know what to say. The words got stuck somewhere between my throat and my heart. He went on talking about how he'd moved on, how he was happy to see someone still working with their hands. Before leaving, he shook mine and said, "I'm glad you made it through." After he left, I sat down and didn't move for a long time. It wasn't relief or joy, just a quiet release, like air leaving a balloon. I didn't realize how much I'd been holding in until then. That night, I took the notebook and wrote one final line before turning out the lights. Maybe forgiveness doesn't come from people. Maybe it comes from time. By the time autumn came again, I realized how different life had become without me noticing. The garage wasn't just a workspace anymore. It had turned into a rhythm. Wake early, open the doors, make coffee on the small electric stove, listen to the hum of the street before anyone else was awake. People came and went, leaving broken things behind, and I fixed them. It was simple, predictable, honest. I stopped thinking about the fire every day. The memories still appeared sometimes, flashes of orange, the sound of splintering wood, the smell of gasoline. But they no longer felt like they were swallowing me. They were part of the background, like old paint that couldn't be removed but had faded with time. Jacob still came by after school, though now he fixed most of his own projects. He'd gotten taller, quieter, more focused. I started letting him take small jobs on his own, replacing plugs, rewiring lamps. He liked the responsibility, and I liked seeing him learn something that might last. His mother, Claire, came less often now. She worked long hours at the hospital, but every few weeks she'd stop by to drop off something. A casserole, a bag of groceries, once even a warm coat when the nights started turning cold. She said I looked thinner than before. I told her I was fine, and she smiled in that way that meant she didn't quite believe me. In early October, the city held a small memorial for those affected by the Willow Street fire. I saw the notice in the newspaper. The headline didn't mention me, but I still hesitated for a long time before deciding to go. It felt strange, walking toward a place that had once been the end of everything for me. The lot where the old houses had stood was empty now. Just concrete foundations, wild grass, and a few flowers planted by the families who'd lost their homes. A few people stood in small groups talking quietly. I recognized some faces but didn't approach them. I stayed on the edge of the crowd, hands in my pockets, trying to feel invisible again. A woman stood at the front, reading the names of those who had lost their homes. When she said a Willow Street, Block B, I felt my chest tighten. Then she said something I didn't expect, that the fire department wanted to thank an unnamed resident who had helped several families escape that night. No name, no story, just acknowledgement. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I closed my eyes and listened to the wind move through the empty lots. The sound of it was soft, almost kind. When the crowd began to leave, I stayed behind. I walked to the spot where my house used to stand. There was nothing there now but gravel and weeds, yet I could still trace where the rooms had been. The kitchen, the hall, the window where I used to sit at night. It was strange how memory could rebuild what time erased. I picked up a small piece of charred brick and put it in my pocket, not as a souvenir, but as a reminder that something had existed there once, and that surviving it didn't mean forgetting it. On my way home, I stopped by the river. The water was low, clear enough to see the stones beneath. I sat there until the light started to fade. For the first time in a long time, I felt a kind of peace that didn't depend on forgetting. That evening, when I returned to the garage, Jacob was waiting. He said Claire had sent dinner. I thanked him, and we sat on the step eating quietly. He told me he wanted to become an engineer one day. I said that made sense. He already had the hands for it. He smiled and said, maybe I'll build houses that don't burn. The sentence caught me off guard, but I didn't show it. I just nodded and said, that's a good goal. After he left, I sat alone for a long time, watching the sky turn from blue to gray. The city lights came on one by one. I thought about what he'd said, houses that don't burn. Maybe that's what I'd been trying to do in my own way. Not with wood and nails, but with trust, patience, and small acts of repair. A few weeks later, I was offered a job at a small repair shop across town. The owner was retiring and wanted someone steady to take over. It would mean closing my garage, moving everything, starting again under a new roof. I wasn't sure at first. The garage had become part of who I was, a quiet, familiar corner of my life. But one evening, Ruth stopped by. She hadn't visited in months. She said she'd heard about the offer and thought I should take it. You've done enough hiding, she said simply. It's time to live again. I didn't answer right away. Her words stayed with me that night. I lay awake thinking about what it would mean to move on, not to erase the past, but to stop letting it define every step forward. The next morning, I went to see the shop. It was small with bright windows and shelves full of tools. The owner was an older man with kind eyes and slow movements. He said he'd heard I was reliable, good with machines. I told him I tried to be. We shook hands. I said yes. When I told Jacob, he looked disappointed at first. But then he smiled and said he'd come visit. I told him he could help me set things up once I moved. He said he'd bring his mother. I didn't say it out loud, but the thought made something in my chest feel lighter. Later, during the last week in the garage, I packed everything carefully. The tools, the radio, the notebooks, and the photo on the wall. When I took it down, I noticed how the color behind it was brighter than the rest of the wall, untouched by time. It reminded me of how even the smallest light can preserve something, no matter how long it's been. Before leaving, I locked the door one final time and stood for a while in the quiet. I thought about the day I first came there, broken and lost, and how much had changed. The garage had been a shelter and a purpose, and now it was a memory, one I could finally leave without pain. As I walked away, the wind carried the faint sound of a passing train. It reminded me of that night long ago, when everything ended and began at once. I didn't turn back. The new shop was on the corner of Maple and 3rd, a busier street, closer to the city center. It was different from the quiet garage I had grown used to. Cars passed constantly, and the sound of people never stopped. For the first few days, I kept the door half closed out of habit. I wasn't used to being seen. The space was clean, organized, with bright light from two large windows that faced the street. The man who sold it to me, Mr. Hayes, left most of his tools behind. Everything had a place. Rows of screwdrivers, boxes of wire, shelves labeled neatly in his faded handwriting. It felt strange, stepping into someone else's order, but I respected it. I kept things mostly as they were. The first customer came in the morning after I opened. A woman with a broken heater. She said she'd passed by this shop all her life but never thought she'd need it. I told her I'd take a look. She smiled, thanked me, and left. There was something comforting about how ordinary it all felt. By the end of the first week, I'd repaired 3 radios, a toaster, and 2 lamps. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep the lights on. I slept in a small room behind the shop, just like before, only now the walls were painted white instead of bare concrete. It felt open, exposed, but not unsafe. Sometimes I caught myself waiting for someone to recognize me, to remember the fire, to say my name out loud, but no one ever did. Here, I was just the man who fixed things. That anonymity, which once felt like punishment, had turned into peace. One afternoon, Jacob and Claire came by. They brought sandwiches and coffee, said the place looked good. Jacob asked if he could paint a small sign for the window. He'd been practicing drawing letters in school. I told him to go ahead. A few days later, he came back with a wooden board that said, "To the fixer's place. Repairs for anything." He'd written it in neat, bold letters, the kind that looked permanent. I hung it in the window. That small sign changed things. People started to notice. More customers came, some just curious. Others because they'd heard about the man who could fix almost anything. I didn't advertise, but word of mouth spread fast. There was a quiet satisfaction in seeing the place fill with life. Claire sometimes stayed after work to help organize. She said it was calming to be around things that could be repaired. I understood that more than I could explain. Some evenings we'd sit on the steps outside watching the city fade into night. It wasn't romantic or sentimental, just 2 people who had seen enough loss to value silence. Around that time, I received a letter from the fire department. I almost didn't open it. My hands shook as I tore the envelope. Inside was a short note, an official acknowledgement that the Willow Street fire case had been formally closed, and that I had been cleared of all involvement. The letter was impersonal, bureaucratic, but to me it meant everything. I sat behind the counter for a long time, staring at the paper. The words didn't undo the years, didn't give back what was taken, but they made something inside me settle. It was like the sound of a door closing softly after being left open too long. That evening, I walked to the river again, the same one I'd gone to after the memorial. I watched the water move slowly under the bridge. The air was cool and the sky was the color of metal. I thought about how long it had taken to reach this quiet. Not peace exactly, but balance. When I got back, I pinned the letter on the wall next to Jacob's sign. Not as proof, but as a reminder that truth sometimes takes time to find its way home. Over the next few months, business grew. People brought in everything from typewriters to clocks. Some came just to talk. Old men who missed their working days. Young couples fixing things for their first apartments. I listened more than I spoke. There's something steady about listening. It makes others feel safe enough to stay. Jacob kept visiting. He'd bring his school projects. Small circuits, wooden frames, motors made from spare parts. He was learning fast. I saw in him what I used to see in myself, curiosity without fear. I tried to teach him what I'd learned, not just how to repair things, but how to take his time, how to think quietly before deciding something was broken for good. Sometimes I'd tell him stories about old machines, how the first radios were tuned by hand, how clocks once ran on weight and gravity. He listened with the same stillness I'd once had when someone explained the world to me. Claire came less often now. Her shifts got longer. When she did visit, we didn't talk much about work or the past, just short conversations about life, the way people age, the cost of rent, the weather that never seemed to match the season anymore. It was ordinary and I was grateful for that. Winter returned. The shop stayed warm from the constant hum of repaired heaters waiting to be picked up. Some nights, when the street outside went quiet, I'd sit by the counter with a cup of coffee, looking at the letter and the photo pinned beside it. Both had faded slightly, but I didn't replace them. Things don't need to stay perfect to stay meaningful. In January, Jacob came by with news. He'd been accepted into a technical school for the summer. He said it like he wasn't sure it was real. I told him he'd earned it. He grinned, then went quiet. Before leaving, he said, you fixed more than machines, right? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He smiled again, waved, and left. After he was gone, I sat in the quiet, hearing the echo of his words. I thought about everything that had happened. The fire, the blame, the years of silence, and how it all led to this small shop on Maple and 3rd. I thought about how life sometimes repairs itself in ways you don't expect. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "Not all things survive the fire, but sometimes what's left is enough to rebuild a life." Then I turned off the lights, locked the door, and listened to the city breathing outside. The first real snow came early that year. It covered the street outside the shop before dawn, muting every sound. When I opened the door that morning, the air was sharp and still. The footprints I left on the sidewalk were the first ones of the day. Winter in the city is different when you have somewhere to be. The cold doesn't bother you as much when you know there's warmth waiting behind a door you built yourself. I made coffee, turned on the small heater near the counter, and watched the snow fall through the front window. For the first time in a long time, it felt like the world was in rhythm with me, quiet, patient, unhurried. Work didn't slow down even as the days grew shorter. People brought in broken heaters, electric blankets, and old radios. Most of them were the same faces that had been coming since summer. Some brought small gifts, a box of cookies, a scarf, a card. I never asked for any of it, but I kept everything. It wasn't about the things themselves. It was about the gesture. After years of being unseen, even small kindnesses meant more than I could admit. One afternoon, a woman came in holding a music box. She said it hadn't played since her husband passed away almost 10 years ago. The box was small, painted blue with chipped edges. When I turned the crank, it made only a faint scraping sound. I told her I'd try my best, and she nodded, eyes tired but hopeful. It took me 3 evenings to fix it. The spring was rusted, and one of the teeth on the drum was bent. I worked carefully, cleaning, aligning, adjusting. When I finally turned it again, the melody came through. Soft, fragile, but alive. I called her the next day. When she heard it play, she started to cry quietly, then thanked me and left. After she was gone, I sat there listening to the tune again. It was a simple song, nothing special, but the sound carried something more. A sense of memory surviving. I realized that maybe that's what I'd been doing all along, helping people recover small pieces of their lives. As the months passed, I noticed the way people began to linger in the shop. They'd come for a repair, but stay to talk. Sometimes about their families, sometimes about nothing. I didn't push them away. The silence between words was often more meaningful than the words themselves. One morning, I arrived to find a small box on the doorstep. Inside was a photograph, the new Willow Street complex, fully rebuilt. Dozens of houses lined up neatly, smoke rising from chimneys, snow on the rooftops. On the back, written in blue ink, "We never forgot what you did." There was no signature. I stared at the photo for a long time. It felt heavier than it should have. I pinned it to the wall beside the others. 3 photos now, the children, the shop letter, and this one, each a quiet chapter of something I never expected to outlive. That winter, the city held a small fair downtown. Ruth stopped by one afternoon and told me I should bring a few of my restored pieces, radios, clocks, fans, to display. I laughed at first, said no one would care. She said that wasn't the point. People should see what you've built, she said. I hesitated for days, then finally agreed. At the fair, I set up a small table with a few items. Nothing special, just things I'd repaired over the years. People stopped to look, asked questions, smiled. Some recognized my sign from the shop window. One woman said her father still used the heater I'd fixed 2 winters ago. Another brought her son to show him the man who saved his grandmother's music box. Standing there, surrounded by strangers who somehow knew pieces of my work, I felt something shift. For the first time since the fire, I wasn't defined by what had been destroyed, but by what I'd rebuilt. Later that evening, after the fair ended, I packed up and walked home through the snow. The streets were quiet again, lights glowing soft behind curtains. My hands were numb, but my heart felt steady. When I reached the shop, I unlocked the door and sat behind the counter. The room smelled of metal, coffee, and dust, familiar and safe. I looked at the wall where the photos hung. okay. The one from Willow Street caught the reflection of the light, glowing faintly. I took out my notebook and wrote, "Sometimes the world doesn't owe you justice. It just gives you another day, and that's enough." A few days later, Jacob returned from school break. He looked older already, more confident. He told me about his classes, about how he'd learned to design small circuits and measure voltage. I listened quietly, proud in a way I couldn't fully say. When he finished, I asked if he still wanted to work here sometimes. He smiled and said, "Always." That afternoon, we worked side by side again, just like before. The rhythm of tools, the quiet talk, the hum of repaired machines. It felt complete. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and endless. The world didn't stop or change for anyone, but I had learned that you didn't need it to. Sometimes it was enough to keep moving within it, one careful repair at a time. By the time spring came again, the shop felt like it had always been there. The sign Jacob painted still hung in the window, slightly faded from the sun. The tools had their places, the shelves their rhythm, the walls their quiet history. Life had become a steady current, simple but full in small ways. I'd stopped counting years since the fire. They blended together now, the seasons moving through their slow rotation, the faces in the shop changing and returning, the world carrying on. I'd grown older without realizing it. My hands weren't as quick. My back ached after long days, but the work still gave me the same calm it always had. Jacob visited whenever he could. His classes took most of his time, but every few weeks he showed up, always with something to fix. He was taller now, his voice different, but his eyes still carried the same focus. Watching him work reminded me that repair is a kind of inheritance. Not the kind you write down, but one you pass quietly, tool by tool. One Saturday, while we were fixing an old radio, he asked what I planned to do with the shop when I couldn't work anymore. I told him I hadn't thought that far ahead. He said maybe he could take it over one day. I looked at him, saw the steady hands, the patience, the care, and said, "Maybe you should." He smiled, but his eyes softened in a way that made me understand he meant it. That night after he left, I sat by the counter and thought about how strange it was to have built something small enough to fit in a single room, but lasting enough to outlive you. Business stayed steady. Sometimes the same people returned year after year with the same appliances, breaking and mending like clockwork. There was a comfort in that repetition, proof that even the fragile things could keep going if someone cared enough to fix them. Ruth came by once that spring. She'd aged too, slower, quieter, but still carrying that same calm presence. She said she was moving closer to her daughter, and this might be the last time she'd see the shop. I walked her through the space, showing her what it had become. She looked around, smiled softly, and said, "You made something good out of all that loss." I didn't know how to answer. She hugged me before leaving, the first real hug I'd had in years. After she was gone, I found one of her old notes tucked behind a shelf, yellowed with time. It said just 2 words, "Keep going." I pinned it beside the photos. That summer was warm and long. The city streets filled with noise again. Kids playing, music drifting through open windows. The shop stayed busy. One afternoon, a local reporter came by. She said she was writing a short piece about neighborhood businesses that had stood the test of time. I hesitated, but she promised it would be simple, no deep questions, just a few words about the shop. I agreed. She took a photo of me standing in the doorway, the sign behind me, the sunlight falling across the tools. A week later, the article appeared in the paper. The headline read, "The man who fixes what others throw away." It wasn't much, but seeing it there stirred something quiet inside me. For years, I'd been known for the wrong reason, as the man blamed for a fire he didn't cause. Now, finally, there was something else beside my name, something true. Customers began mentioning the article, congratulating me, bringing new work. It felt strange at first, but I accepted it. Recognition no longer made me uneasy. I had nothing left to hide. One evening, Claire stopped by after her shift. She said she'd read the article and that it made her proud. We sat outside for a while watching the lights come on across the street. She told me she was thinking of moving, a better job, a quieter place. Jacob would be going with her. I told her she should go. She looked at me for a moment, then nodded. We didn't need many words. Goodbyes don't always come with speeches. Sometimes they're just acknowledgments of how life changes shape. The next week, Jacob came by one last time before leaving. He handed me a small box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a pocket watch, old, scratched, not working. "I thought you'd want to fix this one yourself," he said. I smiled. "I will." When he left, I watched him walk down the street until he turned the corner. It felt both heavy and light, like letting go of something that had already learned how to continue without you. Days passed quietly after that. The shop went back to its rhythm, steady, familiar. I worked on the watch he'd given me, piece by piece, careful with every movement. When I finally got it running, the ticking filled the room with a sound that reminded me of everything time had taken and everything it had given back. I kept the watch on the counter. It became a small part of the shop sound, steady, certain, alive. That autumn, he said the new place was good, that he'd started working part-time at a local repair center, and that people there reminded him of me. He wrote, "You taught me that fixing things is another way of remembering." I read the letter twice, then folded it and placed it in my notebook. Some lessons don't need to be spoken again. They just echo quietly through time. That evening, I went outside and locked the door. The street was calm, a light wind moving through the trees. The air smelled like rain and dust. I stood there a long time, listening to the city, the faint hum of life still going on. Inside, the watch kept ticking. Winter returned quietly that year. The snow came late, and when it did, it fell in slow, heavy layers that softened everything. The noise, the streets, even the memories that had once been sharp. The shop looked smaller under the white, but warmer too. I kept the lights on longer, sometimes staying until midnight just to listen to the silence between the sounds of the ticking watch and the hum of the heater. I found myself thinking about time more often. How it never really healed things, just rearranged them until they didn't hurt as sharply. The fire, the trial, the loneliness, they were still there somewhere, but buried under so many ordinary days that they'd lost their power to define me. Some nights, I walked to the lot on Willow Street. It was still empty. The city never rebuilt on. Grass grew in uneven patches, a few pieces of charred foundation still visible when the snow melted. There was a small sign by the fence now, lot under review for redevelopment. It had been there for years, fading like a promise no one meant to keep. I used to hate that empty space. It reminded me of everything I lost, of the way people's eyes had turned cold when they thought I was guilty. But over time, I began to see it differently. It wasn't just where the fire happened. It was where everything else began. The shop, the forgiveness, the chance to build something new. One evening, I brought the pocket watch with me and sat on the bench near the fence. The ticking was soft in my hand, steady against the cold. I thought about Jacob, about Ruth, about all the people who'd come and gone through my life. Because of that one night, a group of kids ran by, laughing, throwing snow at each other. None of them knew what had happened here. To them, it was just another quiet corner of the city. I realized I liked that. The way memory fades from a place, leaving it clean for someone else to fill. I stayed there until the cold reached my bones. Before leaving, I buried a small object near the edge of the lot, the burnt key I'd kept from my old apartment. I didn't know why I'd kept it so long. Maybe I'd thought it was proof of something. But now it just felt like a weight I no longer needed. The next morning, the shop felt different. Not emptier, just quieter inside me. I swept the floor, dusted the shelves, and opened the blinds. Light came through like it always did, soft and patient. A woman came in later that day with a broken lamp. She said it was her mother's and she couldn't stand to throw it away. I told her I'd take care of it. While I worked, she waited, watching the process. She asked if I ever got tired of fixing old things. I said no, because sometimes fixing something is the only way to remind yourself that not everything broken stays that way. She smiled and nodded, as if she understood exactly what I meant. When she left, I realized that was what I'd been doing all these years. Reminding myself, one repair at a time, that even after loss, there's a kind of quiet rebuilding that never really ends. Weeks passed. The snow melted. The shop window fogged less each morning. I kept the same schedule, but each day felt softer, less urgent. I started closing earlier, walking home before dark. I'd sit by the window, drink tea, and write small notes. Thoughts, fragments, nothing that needed to last. One of those nights I wrote, "There's peace in ordinary days. You just have to stop waiting for something louder." It didn't feel profound, but it was true. Jacob's letters kept coming, shorter now but filled with life, stories of his job, of people he was helping. He mentioned he'd met someone. He said she reminded him of the way I talked about Ruth. I smiled when I read that. Maybe that was how things were meant to go. Lessons passed without ceremony, just through how you live. The city started a small memorial project that spring. They were marking sites of old disasters, not to mourn, but to remember what came after. One morning, a man from the city council came to the shop and asked if I'd like to share something about the Willow Street fire. For a long moment, I hesitated. Then, I said yes. When the plaque went up, it was simple. No names, no blame, just a line that read, "On this site, a fire once took what could never be replaced, but from loss came rebuilding, and from silence came resilience." I stood there alone the day they unveiled it. A few people stopped, read it, moved on. No one looked twice at me, and that was exactly how I wanted it. The world had finally put the story down. That evening, I went back to the shop and unlocked the door. The air smelled faintly of oil and sawdust. I turned on the lights, sat behind the counter, and wound the pocket watch again. The sound filled the room. Slow, even unbroken. For the first time in years, I realized I didn't need to fix anything else. Everything that mattered was already working. The following summer was slow and bright. The air carried that calm warmth that makes everything seem softer, even memory. The shop stayed open fewer hours, and most of my customers now were faces I'd known for years. Some came just to talk, not to fix anything. They said the place felt peaceful, like time moved differently inside. I never argued. Maybe it did. Most mornings I opened the door early just to listen. The city sounded different at dawn. The hum of cars, birds, a train in the distance. It was all ordinary, but it carried the kind of stillness I used to think I'd never feel again. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was full. Sometimes I caught myself thinking about the people who once accused me. The neighbors who whispered, the reporters who waited outside the courthouse, the officer who wouldn't meet my eyes when they released me. For years, I'd imagined confronting them, explaining again, proving my innocence one more time. But that desire had gone somewhere I couldn't reach anymore. Forgiveness didn't come as a grand gesture. It came slowly, through the weight of time, until one day I realized I no longer needed anyone to say they were sorry. One afternoon, I received a letter from Jacob. It was longer than usual. He wrote that he and his wife were expecting a baby. He said he'd been saving for a small repair shop of his own. Maybe not as quiet as mine, but one built on the same idea, that broken things deserve patience, not replacement. The end, he wrote, "I still have that pocket watch you fixed. It reminds me that everything worth keeping takes time." I sat there for a while after reading it. I looked around the shop. The shelves, the worn counter, the faded note from Ruth that still hung on the wall. Keep going. I realized it had never been about repairing machines. It was about finding steadiness in a world that keeps burning and rebuilding itself. That evening, I decided to close the shop early. I turned the sign to a closed, swept the floor, and sat by the window as the light began to fade. Outside, people moved through their own small stories. A man locking his bike, a woman carrying groceries, a kid chasing a ball across the sidewalk. None of them knew who I was or what had happened years ago on that street, and that anonymity felt like grace. I took the pocket watch from the counter, wound it one last time, and listened. The steady tick filled the room, soft, even familiar. The rhythm of survival, the rhythm of life continuing quietly without apology. When the sun dropped below the buildings, I turned off the lights. The shop fell into stillness, just the faint glow from the street outside slipping through the window. I stayed there a while longer, letting the silence settle. Before leaving, I looked once more at the photo wall. Faces, places, small fragments of a life that had been rebuilt piece by piece. I didn't feel regret anymore, only gratitude. For the work, for the forgiveness, for the time I'd been given to put things right in the smallest, simplest ways. As I locked the door and stepped into the warm night, I didn't look back. The city around me pulsed with quiet light, like a heart that never really stopped beating. Somewhere far away, another train passed. Somewhere else, a fire burned, and someone was starting over again. Life went on, imperfect, fragile, but real. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out our other stories about real people and real emotions.